very much, Mr. Speaker, and it saddens me that this is likely the last time I'm going to get to rise in this House and debate this piece of legislation, unless, of course, we have some type of miracle in the Senate that protects the rights of workers. I want to thank my previous colleague for his speech, but I find it the comments that he made to be paramount in their hypocrisy when it comes to what he's actually saying. He said, as the former Labour Minister for Ontario, that in Ontario he had it right. Well, guess what workers in Ontario get to do when they are asked if they want to be a part of a union or not? They get the right to a secret ballot vote. So, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't make any sense to me. He's talked about the rights of workers. These are workers' rights and human rights. So what about the right to vote? What about the right to know where your mandated, legislatively mandated union dues, which are tax deductible at the expense to about $500 million for the taxpayers of Canada, what about the rights of all of those people to know how that money is actually spent? Well, we know. We don't have to rely on the misinformation campaign by the member opposite. We can simply take a look at the polling information that's done time and time again, which has resulted in the very same laws, the regressive laws that the Liberal parties, with the support of the NDP, are going back to, laws that have been changed in virtually every other democracy in the world that we would consider ourselves a peer to, and in the provinces of our very own country, of which the United States, for example, has mandatory secret ballot voting to decide whether or not you want to be in a union or not. Various other countries in Europe do the same thing. Various provinces in Canada do the exact same thing. I don't know any member of Parliament that's been able to stand in this House and say that a constituent came to them and said, please, once I elect you with my secret ballot vote, I'd like you to trundle off to Ottawa, rise in your place and make some speech about things that are flowery but don't make any sense whatsoever, and demand in the House of Commons that you take away my ability to see where my tax dollars or my union dues are being spent, and please, for goodness sakes, take away my ability to have a secret ballot vote. I don't want to make that decision on my behalf. Tomfoolery, Mr. Speaker. This is absolutely ludicrous. If we take a look at what people actually think, and when they talk a great game about union bosses, they talk a great game about employers, but they never actually talk about what an actual worker wants. This is what poll after poll of unionized workers, people who actually pay the dues, not the people that live off of the dues, not the people necessarily who tax subsidize the union dues, but the actual people who show up with their lunch pail in their hands every day going to work and pay these union dues. So when Leger, as recent as 2013, asked the questions, the opinion on a secret ballot when a union is formed or removed from a workplace, across the country, 69% completely agree, 17% somewhat agree. We are talking numbers north of 75, 80% in the various regions of this country of unionized workers say absolutely they want the right to have a mandatory secret ballot vote to verify whether or not they want to be a member of a union. What is so wrong with supporting that notion? It is absolutely mind-boggling to me. This would be tantamount to a member of Parliament saying, I want the right, when I'm door knocking in my constituency during a by-election or a federal election, general election campaign, to be able to take the ballot straight to the door of that voter. I can bring along two of the biggest people I know, and they can stand right behind me while I'm knocking on that door, and I can say to the person who answers, I think it might be in your best interest if you vote for me right here, right now. That's called card checking, and that's sometimes how it's played out. I've heard from my constituents, now the Liberals and the NDP like to claim that it was the government's notion, the previous Conservative government's notion, to put this bill forward. I did it. I did Bill C-525. I did it because I heard from the workers in my riding that they were not getting the accountability that they wanted. Now, I don't think, as a member of Parliament, that I should be reaching into the internal operations of a union, but I do believe, as a member of Parliament, I have a responsibility to give every accountability measure I can to the workers to understand where their money is being spent, so they have to be able to see where it's being spent, and the ability to hold that union to account if they're not doing a good job spending union due money. So absolutely, this is the right way to solve this problem. Give people the tools to look after themselves, and they will do it. Mr. Speaker, I could go on about this poll. Opinions on disclosure of financial information. This is the other aspect of the bill that's being taken back. Now, it's clear that the Liberals are simply promising things to their friends. Nobody in their right mind would actually take away financial transparency provisions in any piece of legislation. We move forward on transparency when it comes to letting taxpayers know where their dollars are being spent and let people know what what investments are being made on their behalf. But no, that's not what's happening here. What's happening is through Bill C4, the Liberal government, with the support of the New Democrats and the Green Party and the Bloc Québécois, only Conservatives, actually want people to know, let people know where their money is being spent. And it doesn't just stop at unions. They're doing the same thing by not enforcing the First Nations financial transparency accountability legislation. Because they've aligned themselves with the elite at the top, the union bosses, the reserve chiefs, the band chiefs and council members. They're not actually looking after the so-called middle-class, everyday, ordinary person either living on reserve or carrying their lunch pail every day to their job. So it's say one thing and do absolutely the opposite. So we don't have to trust me if you don't take my word for it, but let's take a look. Opinion on disclosure of financial information. They asked respondents for their opinion on the disclosure of financial information without giving them a preamble. The majority of employed Canadians completely or somewhat agree that it should be mandatory for unions to publicly disclose detailed financial information on a regular basis. So how many completely agree? Not one region of this country actually had anything less than 60% for completely agree, and nothing less than 16% for somewhat agree, for totals of north of 80% again on almost all of these indicators. 80% when asked in a poll. These are numbers that most people could only dream of getting in an election. I know, because I've got it once. Having this kind of a mandate to be able to go forward and do something is wonderful. This is what Canadians want. This is what they expect. This is what they deserve. This is, however, what's being taken away from them. If you take a look on opinion on union due uses, most union workers might not actually know where their union dues are being spent. More than 8 out of 10 employed Canadians completely or somewhat disagree with using union dues to fund attack ads against a political party, or making contributions to political parties, or making contributions to advocacy groups unrelated to their workplace needs. The fact that that question needs to be asked at all in a poll is indicative of the problem that can be resolved by, one, shedding light on where the money is being spent, and two, giving people the right to vote in what their best interest is based on the performance of the union that's representing them or wanting to represent them. I simply cannot fathom why anybody would want to take away somebody's right to a secret ballot vote and take away somebody's right to see where their money is being spent on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, I have to appeal to the better angels in this place, the ones that know and understand what fairness is all about, the ones that stand up and speak for transparency, that speak in favor of accountability. These people need to stick to their convictions and vote against this regressive piece of legislation, taking us back to a time where nobody knows where the money is being spent, taxpayers can't be assured where their taxpayer-funded union due deductions are being spent, and where workers actually have the ability each and every time to decide if they want to be in a union, to recertify to be in a union, or to decertify. And the process under Bill C-525 made decertification and certification exactly the same. And yet, the Liberals and the NDP and the other parties in this House, Mr. Speaker, say that it's now unbalanced. When it's exactly the same, Mr. Speaker, it is in balance. You don't drive around with 15 pounds of pressure in your front left tire and 60 pounds of pressure in your front right tire. That's not how it works. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I can only say how proud I was as a member of Parliament to have a mandate from a secret ballot vote to come to this place to present a private member's bill that changed the legislation for the betterment of workers in this country, for workers. And I'll stand by them all the way, regardless of what this government tries to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague for his statements, but he was referring to, and he keeps bringing it and saying that the people want a right to know where the money, their dues are being spent. And I'm really kind of taken back at that because I've been involved in union for 34 and a half years with 3 different locals over my career. And in fact, 2 of them, I was the president of the union, so I know how the system works. And when that money is deposited from the company that the members are giving dues to its own local, there's positions, what they call not only the financial officer, but they have what they call trustees. And on a monthly basis, there's a report that's given to its members, okay, on a line-by-line basis where every penny went out of that during that month. So I'm having a hard time understanding from the member what he's saying that the people want to know. They have a right to know, and we give them that information. But if a person wants to say, I don't want to attend a union meeting to find out where that money's going, and I want it mailed to me, that's a different subject. So I'm asking the member, it is transparent what they're doing. So what is he referring to when he's stating that they don't know where the money is going?
Member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I brought forward my bill on 525 in response to questions about financial transparency. I looked after the accountability part of it, which dealt with the mandatory secret ballot vote. But understand, Mr. Speaker, that the people that I had come to talk to me in my own constituency had differences of opinions with their union leadership. And I've been a member of a union as well, several different times. I'm not arguing against whether or not unions should or should not exist. The reality is, though, that certain members get offside with their union leadership. That union then has the entire wherewithal of all of that union due money to use court litigation and action against members that disagree with the leadership of the union. And when they try to ask for that information and get specific information about their case, about how much money is being spent on litigation against one poor union member, a union member, by the way, that's supposed to be being looked after by the union leadership, not sued and litigated by the union membership, they can't get that information. So is the honourable member standing in his place here and accusing my constituents of lying?
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
You know, at one time I was a Labour critic in the province of Manitoba, and I can tell you, whenever we dealt with Labour legislation, there was always almost like a general given, and that is that if you're going to change a Labour law, one of the things that's fundamental to doing that is you want to be able to get a consensus between Labour and management, Mr. Speaker. When government wants to change legislation, what typically will happen is that they will enter into a consultation process and try to build that consensus. Canada works better when we have harmony within the labour force. That means unions working along with business. The member might be surprised, but I can assure the member that unions have played a valuable role in society, and we have what we have today because, in good part, of our union movement. And my question to the member is, can he tell us, as the sponsor of one of the bills that actually offended a great number of not only union organizers, but I'd also suggest to you, even on the management side, because of the manner in which the Harper government ultimately saw that bill pass, would the member not acknowledge that at the very least, if you want to promote harmony within the labour and management community, what you need to do is you need to build consensus before you introduce legislation?
The honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we already had the polling information that I put out there that tells us that there's already a broad consensus amongst the Canadian public about how they would like to see this particular piece of legislation. And, Mr. Speaker, Bill C-525 is no different than the laws that already exist in other jurisdictions outside of Canada and in our provinces inside Canada. This is not some hairy-fairy massive change. This is simply taking the labour I can't even remember the name of the it's the Canadian Labor Code, or whoever looks after the private sector. They have the ability in the legislation before 525. They may actually go to the union members and have a secret ballot vote. Changing the word may to shall is all really that Bill C-525 did, taking something that's optional and making it mandatory at no extra cost, by the way. The bill didn't need a royal recommendation or anything like that because the Labour Council could simply absorb that. It's part of their mandate already. It's part of what they do. So, no, I'm not buying his argument. Is he saying that private members shouldn't have the right to bring forward legislation to change labor laws or things like the wording of the national anthem?